How's it going? Dave here, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about how to use dominant chords, specifically 5 different ways of using them. So the first way is going to be how to use them diatonically in a chord progression. The second way is how we can spice up our chord progressions with secondary dominants. Then the third way is tritone substitutions. The fourth way is using altered dominants. And then the fifth and final method of using dominant chords will be the backdoor dominant. So let's get straight into it. The dominant chord in your key has a very specific purpose and function. What it does is it builds tension at the end of your chord progression so that you can resolve on your tonic. So the dominant chord is the 5th chord in your key. So for example, in the key of C, C, D, E, F, G, G7 is your dominant chord, and it has that tension which resolves nicely back on our tonic. G7, C. If we were to make a basic chord progression in the key of D, for example, we can play a 1, 4, 5, D, G, and A7. As you can hear, that A7 builds the tension at the end of our chord progression, and it gets released by hitting the tonic, which is D. Now the reason this works is if we take a look at the A7 chord itself, we've got the notes A, we've got C sharp, we've got E, and we've got G. The 3rd, 5th, and 7th in our A7 chord all want to resolve down to specific notes of the D chord. So our C sharp wants to resolve up to the D. Our E wants to resolve up to the F sharp of our D major chord, and the G in our A7 chord wants to resolve up to the A in our D major chord. And that's why you get so much tension being built, because you've got these 3 notes that are dying to move to the tonic notes. And also there's a tritone inside that dominant 7th chord, which adds even more tension because it's a bit of a dissonant interval. So that is how a dominant chord works in a standard diatonic chord progression. You don't just have to play a dominant 7th chord, you could play a dominant 9th chord, you could play a dominant 11th chord, or you could play a dominant 13th chord. So I'll just show you examples of those. The dominant 11th chord is my favorite shape, to be honest, when it comes to dominant chords. And you could play a dominant 13th chord, which I really like as well. Now, if you want all the shapes of these dominant chords, head down to the description and you can grab the first 2 chapters of my book, Chord Charisma, for free. That's going to show you how to write a diatonic chord progression and add extensions to every single one of your chords, like 7ths, 9ths, 11ths, and 13ths. And there's tons of chord shapes there, so you'll really learn a lot. So that was the first use of dominant chords, just as the 5 chord in your key. Now let's take a look at secondary dominants. So let's take another chord progression in D major. We're going to take D, then we're going to move to B minor, then we're going to play G, then A. So 1, 6, 4, 5. Now a secondary dominant takes that function of your dominant chord and applies it to every single chord in, well, potentially to every single chord in your chord progression. What I mean by that is if we are playing our D and now we're moving to our B, our secondary dominant would affect this B chord because it's our target chord, the chord we're going to. So what you want to do is find what a 5th above B is, which is F sharp, and you play a dominant 7th chord from there, so an F sharp 7. And it leads nicely into your B minor. So we've got D, F sharp 7, B minor. Then the next chord in our chord progression is G. So a 5th above G is D, and we can play a D7 before we play the G. So altogether we've got D, F sharp 7, B minor, D7, G major. So and then the final chord in our chord progression, A, or A7 if you want to, A fifth above that is E, so we can play an E7 before we play that. And that's how secondary dominants work. I've done a video on secondary dominants where I really dive deep into them, so you can check it out. I'll put it in the description and I'll put it up there as well. So let's just take one more listen to that chord progression with all the secondary dominants added. So you can add ninths, 11ths and 13ths to all your secondary dominant chords as well, further spicing up your chord progression, which I won't go into now because we'll be here forever. This is already going to be a long video, I can feel it. The third method of adding dominant chords into your chord progressions is tritone substitutions. Now remember when I said in your dominant chord you've got a tritone interval, and that creates a lot of tension which resolves nicely into your tonic. So if we take that A7 and take a look at the notes, we've got A, C sharp, E and G. What we need to know about dominant chords is that the third and the seventh are what make it a dominant chord. If the third was a minor third, then we'd have a minor seventh chord. And if the seventh was a major seventh, then we'd get a major seventh chord. And this combination of minor seventh and major third is specifically what makes this chord a dominant chord. Now, those two notes are a tritone apart, and the cool thing with tritones is if you switch them round, they're still a tritone apart from each other. So C sharp to G is a tritone, and G to C sharp is also a tritone, which means that if you take your A7 chord, for example, and move it up a tritone, so we get D sharp 7 or E flat 7, you still have those notes G and C sharp, although in an E flat 7 it's called B flat. Those two notes are within your E flat 7. They're the third and the seventh, although they've been switched around, but that doesn't matter. They make the chord a dominant seventh, which means that the A7 and the E7 are interchangeable. I have, again, made a video on tritone substitutions where I go into it in a lot more detail, so check that out down in the description or up in that top corner if you want to go a bit further. But basically, to use tritone substitutions, it's really easy. Anytime you have a dominant chord in your chord progression, whether that be a standard diatonic one or your secondary dominant, all you do is play another dominant seventh chord, a tritone above that one instead, so it's a substitution, and it works the same way as the original dominant seventh chord. So instead of playing an A7, I can use an E7 and it will function in the same way. So for example, D, G, and A7. Instead of playing the A7, I can now play the E flat 7 and it will sound really cool. So and a quick hack for tritone substitutions, you just play a dominant seventh chord, 1 fret higher than the next chord that you're going to. So if the chord that I'm going to is G, then you could play A flat 7 before that. Or if the chord that I was playing was B, then before the B you could just play a C7 and that'd be a tritone substitution. Alright? And that works really well. So that is the third way of using dominant chords in your chord progressions. Now, the fourth way is to use altered dominant chords. Dominant chords already create enough tension, but altered dominant chords create even more tension and can really jazz up your chord progressions. Altered dominant chords are basically just dominant chords with an altered fifth or an altered ninth or both. So for example, a flat fifth or a sharp fifth, or a flat ninth or a sharp ninth. So for example, if we take a dominant seventh chord here, A7, and we raise the fifth, we get an A7 sharp 5. That's my favorite one. Or we could get an A7 flat 9. If we add a flat 9 to our chord. For example, if we take that same 1-4-5 chord progression in D, D, G, and A7, and turn the A7 into an A7 sharp 5, It just jazzes things up a little bit more. And if we use the flat 9, for example, can really add a lot to your chord progressions. Now, I've done an entire video on altered dominant chords as well, where I show you loads of different shapes for altered dominant chords. So make sure you go and check the video out. It's in the description, or you can click there. Altered dominant chords can be used in place of your standard diatonic 5 chord. So your A7 can be changed into an A altered. You could use it as a secondary dominant as well. And you can even use altered dominant chords for your tritone substitutions. It's all about experimentation and seeing what works. Now, the final way of using dominant chords in your chord progressions is to use the backdoor dominant chord. Now, the backdoor dominant chord is a little bit different. So what we do is we place it on the flat 7 degree of our scale. So in D, the flat 7 of D would be C, and you play a C7 instead of the A7. So let me take that D, G, and A7 chord progression and change the A7 to C7 and have a listen to what we get. The backdoor dominant chord is a really nice way of just switching things up a little bit if you're bored of using the standard 5 chord all the time. Now, the reason why this works is if we take a look at the C7 chord, the C is the sharp 9 of your A7 chord. So it's like we're playing an altered tension there. Then the E in our C7 chord is the 5th of our A7 chord. Then the G in our A7 chord is the same as the flat 7 of our A7 chord. And then the B flat in our C7 chord is the same as the flat 2nd in our A7 chord. So what you've got there is you've got the 5th and the 7th of your A7 chord, but you've also got the sharp 9 and the flat 9 of the A7. So it's like we're just playing an altered A7 chord, but with the root and the 3rd taken away. Those are the 5 different ways of using dominant chords that I've come up with for this video. If you enjoyed the video, please click like, let me know what you thought in the comments, and subscribe to my channel. And don't forget, if you want to create some really awesome sounding chord progressions, to go to the description and check out the first 2 chapters of my book, which you can get for absolutely free. It's going to teach you which chords in your key have what function, which order to put them in to create a solid chord progression. And then it's going to show you how to add extensions, so 6th, 6th, 9 chords, 7th chords, 9th chords, 11th chords, 13th chords as well, with all the different shapes, so that you're not going to get stuck. And it's really going to help you create some really unique and sophisticated sounding chord progressions. All of that for free, so don't miss out on it. Anyway, I'll catch you in the next video. See you later.